Sunday drive home on Transfiguration Sunday. Did my voice just crack there? Sunday drive home. Today we're on the this is nerdy liturgy stuff, but we're on the 3-year lectionary down here at the St. Paul Lutheran Church, Austin, Texas. Come visit sometime. And so that means that they press the 3-year lecture. There used to be a little buffer between Epiphany and Lent, the Gesima Sundays. But the new 3-year lectionary puts Lent all the way up to Epiphany, and you got this big kind of whiplash, whoosh, because today was Transfiguration Sunday, which is, anyways, is great to talk about, to think about and to imagine the transfiguration of Jesus. It's such an important incident, an important event in the life of Jesus. It's a hinge event. As you read through the Gospels, there's a couple of turning points and pivot points, and the Transfiguration is one of those pivot points where all of a sudden, it's perhaps of all the moments in the ministry and life of Jesus, this is the one where his glory shines through most obviously, most clearly. His divine nature is on display. And yet, mysteriously, this happens way out of the way. I mean, Jesus, it's as far away from Jerusalem and even from Galilee that Jesus ever travels, except for when he was a baby and he went to live in Egypt for a little bit. Other than that, this is as far as Jesus gets from the action. And he takes his disciples way up north, past Dan, past Caesarea Philippi, to Mount Hermon, to the ski area. There's a ski area on Mount Hermon. At least there used to be. I don't know if they're still skiing over there. It was way up north. And so Jesus is letting his glory shine through, but it's still hidden. I mean, his glory is no longer hidden by his flesh. His glory is no longer hidden. It's no longer kind of inside that nobody can see it. And yet, it is hidden by distance. It is hidden by being way, way, way up on top of this mountain. It is hidden even from 9 of the 12 disciples. Jesus pulls out of the 12, he pulls 3 to go with him up the mountain, Peter, James, and John. And so even though Jesus is revealing his glory, he's doing so in a very particular way. And I think maybe that's part of the key. I've been thinking about this all week. In fact, we were talking about it in the sermon today and across the fence on Monday, is that half of the miracle of the transfiguration of Jesus is when he's not transfigured. I mean, I was trying to think of other opportunities that if I was Jesus and I could be transfigured like that, I would probably have taken advantage of it at other times. Like, for example, can you imagine? Jesus is there surrounded by his enemies. It's Holy Tuesday. He's teaching in the temple, and these Pharisees and scribes are coming to trouble him, to test him, and to tempt him with all these questions. Who should we pay taxes to? What's the greatest commandment? Whose wife will this woman be in the resurrection? They're asking all these trick questions to try to catch Jesus in his words. And it seems like at some point he would have just gotten exasperated and just said, glory. Or when Jesus is before Pilate, remember this moment. It seems like the Ecce Homo, behold the man. This is a famous moment. It's in all these paintings and everything, and it rightly so is it's a particularly profound moment when Pilate, it seems like, is trying to garner sympathy for Jesus, so he has him beaten to the tar, and his beard is pulled out, and there's spit on his face, and he's got the crown of thorns, and he has the purple robes, and he's got the staff there like a mock king. And he brings him out before the people and says, behold the man. Jesus just He looks pathetic because he's been beaten half to death already, whipped. Now, what if Jesus would have chosen that moment to be transfigured? When Pilate throws down his crown and gives Jesus his throne, and everyone falls down and worships him, afraid. Or what about that moment when they have the cross there and they lay Jesus down on top of the cross and they bind his arms to the wood, and the soldier has his knee on the arm of Jesus and has the nail pressed into his hand, and he's got the hammer raised, ready to strike. What about that moment to be transfigured? And he drops the nail and he drops the hammer, and they lift Jesus up and they honor him. But it was necessary. Jesus tells remember on the road to Emmaus after the resurrection, and they're gloomy. We had hoped that Jesus was going to be the one, and Jesus, he goes and says, well, I'll walk with you, and he starts to unfold all the things in the scripture concerning himself, and he says it was necessary for the Christ to suffer before he entered into his glory. Suffering first, then glory. In fact, the temptation of Jesus, which I think we'll talk about next week, the temptation that the devil presents to Jesus is to have the benefit of the cross without the trouble of the cross. Tell me if you don't think that describes one of our great cultural temptations nowadays. To have the benefit without the trouble. The devil says, you turn this stone into bread and eat it. Why all this fasting stuff? Or you can have all the kingdoms of the world, just fall down and worship me. Don't worry about the cross. You could be Jesus. You could be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You can sit on the throne without even the trouble of the cross. But it's necessary to suffer before he enters into glory, because the suffering isn't necessary for Jesus. He sits at the right hand of the Father in eternity. The suffering is necessary for you, for me. The suffering is necessary because of our sin. The suffering is necessary because of Adam and Eve. The suffering is required. So Jesus says, no, I'm not going to be transfigured anywhere else except for way up here. And I'm going to do this for you guys, and I don't even want you to mention it until after I'm raised from the dead. Can you imagine Peter? I was just thinking about this because the text says that it was 6 days later that Jesus took the disciples up on the mountain, and 6 days later than what? And the thing that happened 6 days before was this whole big conversation with Peter. It was an amazing conversation. It's when Jesus said, "Who do people say that I am?" And they said, "Well, some say a prophet, or Elijah, or Jeremiah, or John the Baptist raised from the dead." And And then Jesus says, well, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus commends him. Oh, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. Flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you, but my Father's in heaven. And then Jesus starts to tell him, okay, now you know what the Christ is, so now I want to tell you what it means. It means I have to suffer. It means I have to die. It means I have to be handed over to the Gentiles and all this sort of stuff. And Peter can't have any of it. He's like, no. No, Jesus, take it easy. Take it easy. All this talk about suffering and death. Look, you're the Christ. That means you're going to sit on the throne. You're going to rule and reign. It's going to be great for you and maybe for us, but for you, it's going to be great. He takes him aside. Peter, the text says, rebuked him, but the Lord rebukes him right back and says, get behind me, Satan, tempter, accuser. Get behind me, Satan, for your mind is not on the things of God, but on the things of men. That's what happened 6 days before the transfiguration. That Peter and Jesus got into it about whether the Christ should suffer. And now you got to think that Peter, there on the mountain, looks at Jesus in his glory and says, this is what I'm talking about. We need more of this. We need more glory. Let's make a tent. 3 tents. Let's capture this moment. But Jesus tells Peter, after God the Father rebukes him, this is my beloved Son, listen to him. Jesus tells Peter, don't tell anybody about the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And Peter's got to think, well, we got to talk about this again? About being raised from the dead? About being dead? We got to talk about death? Yes. And this, I think, is the point. One of the points. There's a lot of points. In fact, 2 Peter, the whole book of 2 Peter is probably answering the question, what do we learn from the transfiguration? That's where Peter says, we were there. We beheld his glory. We heard the voice that spoke from the excellent glory cloud. When we were with him on the holy mountain. I think that's our homework this week, is to read 2 Peter in light of the transfiguration of Jesus. So there's a lot of points, including that 2 Peter 1:3, where he's given us everything that pertains to life and godliness in his divine power, so that we might be partakers of the divine nature. What a promise. But here's the point for our comfort, and that is that the transfigured one is the crucified one. When the disciples, when the women come looking for Jesus in the empty tomb, the angel says, "You seek Jesus." They don't say, "You seek Jesus who was transfigured." It says, "You seek Jesus who was crucified." Cross first. Cross first, then the glory. That's a Sunday drive home.